Paranormality After Dark with Mister Sam, the dark artist. We're doing a live Q&A. Sam, sorry. But Sam usually does a Wednesday night seance with Sam live drawing for his Patreon members. If you haven't checked it out yet, it is very entertaining. I got to mute this feed over here because it's coming back in my ear. So tonight he has joined us, Paranormality Media. Sam will be featured in our next issue. And tonight we are doing a live Q&A with a live drawing. Please send in your questions and Sam will be glad to answer. He kind of already does that on his regular show, but tonight he's going to be doing it here for us on a special occasion. He's got his tea in hand, he's got his pencil, he's got his paper. And this is a special occasion because now we can actually see his face as he draws. So
yeah, no one's ever seen this before. It's a mystery.
No, first ever.
Most people thought I was 100 years old. I'm actually really young.
Well, you got that deep dark accent to you. It's the dark
British
artist.
Accent.
Yeah.
My accent's a bit of a mix because I've been out in over here in Los Angeles for about in and out around all over the place really since 2007. So what's that, 15, 16 years. So my accent's all over the place. And it's funny when I go back to England, if people see, interviews of me online or they hear a podcast or something, they always say I sound American or I've picked up a little bit of American in certain pronunciations of certain things I'll say or whatever. But British, born and bred. Here we are.
What part?
I was born in Liverpool.
Okay.
Which is really weird because I don't have a Liverpool accent anymore. It's kind of gone. But if I see my relatives, it'll come back. If I hear them on the phone, I remember my grandmother would call me, and my friends would be in the room when I was a teenager, and I'd get off the phone, and all my friends' faces were sort of in disbelief because my accent had changed on the phone to Liverpool while I was talking to her. So it's funny, it depends, I suppose, who you're with. If you're hanging around with someone for long enough, especially if you've had a drink as well, I think it kind of loosens the language of who you're with, and you start to, maybe it's a subconscious survival thing that people do, but I've seen people adopt Irish accents. I've seen people do that in Los Angeles where suddenly they start sounding like they're from Texas when they're not, just because they're talking to someone from Texas. It's really weird.
No, I've had to adopt an accent. I'm from South Texas originally, which we don't really have an accent. But then
Are you sure?
Yeah,
I think you do.
It's pretty thick right now. But then working in East Texas, Louisiana, they have like a serious accent. So whenever I was working and I was off hours with my wife and I pick up the phone for somebody from work and I'd hang up and she'd be like, "What was that?" I'm like, "What?"
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That was not
That's
your
exactly
voice.
what I'm talking about. Yeah. It's so weird. It's really bizarre. But I found it, I'll go to New York for maybe a week, and I'll be hanging out with friends at, say, New York Comic Con or something like that. In the past, we've gone to a bar in Brooklyn or whatever, and by the end of the night, I'm saying, yeah. And you just can't help it, can you? It just sort of happens. But yeah, my accent has changed all over the place over the years. And the Liverpool accent sort of pretty much gone entirely, really. I mean, I'll say from the age of 10 onwards, I lived in a different part of England in the northwest, Lytham St. Anne's. So people from there are known as Sandgronians, because it's a coastal Victorian town on the edge of the Irish Sea. The sea's all grey and it's kind of windy and miserable most days. But the accent there, other people have said to me, "Oh, yeah, you've definitely got a St. Anne's accent." But again, it's changed. People, if I ask them, guess where I'm from, they never get it right. So weird.
That is. And have you ever done any voice work before?
Quite a lot here and there. I'm trying to think the latest thing I've done. I don't know if I can talk about it. But I've just done let's just say I've just done a voiceover for a children's story about Halloween. So it's all character driven and creepy, and did my best John Hurt impression. So we'll see when that comes out. I think hopefully this year. But we just finished recording that, and it's going to be animated as well as audiobook. So we'll see. And that's Lindy Ryan, amazing author. She's put that all together. And aside from that, I've done voice work on albums, Fear Factory, Genexus album. I'm on a couple of tracks on that album, the intro and the outro. A couple of short films, little animations here and there. But generally speaking, podcast work is something that I keep getting asked to do, and I shy away from it because I don't particularly want my voice on everybody's podcast, because that would just kind of be annoying. It'd be like, oh, it's that voice again. And then when my own podcast launches, I think it might conflict with it being slightly different delivery. It's okay doing character voices and different, styles for different things, but if it's just me talking on 20 different podcasts, then I think that would get annoying. So I've sort of turned down a lot of those, like, would you do the intro for this or that? I'd rather not,
So mainly just like intro stuff.
Oh yeah.
On a podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know at first they want, can you just read my whole podcast for me? And then that's the thing, like storytelling.
I've been asked. Yeah.
Oh,
people have said, oh, I'm putting a podcast together. Would you do it? And I sort of say, what you mean? Should I launch a podcast myself? Yeah. No. Confusing.
So for all the fans of Paranormality Media, where we initially started off as being fans of paranormal podcast, Mr. Sam here will be releasing his own podcast in the near future. So if you enjoy what he does here tonight and you enjoy the sound of his voice, very unique sound of his voice, just know that we have that coming up in the near future. So be on the lookout for it. Yeah,
in the near future, whenever that will be. It's a long time coming. I'm not even going to say what the title of it is called, because things change, and I'm not even going to give it a release date because foolishly I thought I would be ready to launch it maybe a couple of months ago, and it's still not ready. Friend of mine, Eric J. Morgan's doing the music, the intro as we speak, and he's doing some phenomenal work. It sounds great. So musically, it's going to be really good. The rest of it, I don't know. It's a labor of love, and instead of just pushing it out, like no disrespect, not going to name names, but there are a lot of podcasts out there where they sort of just throw it out every week for the sake of it, and they retell the same stories, and it doesn't do anything for me personally when people are just trying to be funny and they're goofing around. Comedy's great, but when that's all your podcast is, it's a little too much after a while when you have the same sort of, it's almost like a trope, isn't it? You're three Irish guys in a room all trying to be funny, talking about Mothman. It gets old very quickly. So not to sound like a bit of an arse, but mine will not be a comedy-driven interview podcast. That's for sure.
No, well, that's good. And you mentioned music, and music is very important with the podcasters. Some of my favorites are the Monsters Among Us. I love his intro, Derek Hayes' intro. Shannon LeGros on ITF. Her intro and outro. Like, I have to listen to the 6-minute outro every time.
Yeah, Shannon's is great. You can't turn it off, can you?
Yeah.
You have, as you say, you have to listen to the whole thing because it's brilliant.
And the speakers in my truck are like dying. I have to turn it down. So bass heavy, but it's so like impactful. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's a good use of quotes and a very long score of music. That sort of it all just fits really well together with what Shannon does on her show. It's an addictive, as you say, little outro piece of music where you can't turn it off. And it's not something that you would choose to listen to. You're not going to sort of, pull out the vacuum cleaner and think, I'm going to put that song on. But when you hear it on the podcast, you just leave it on, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty influential. And then there's other podcasters, Sapphire Sandalo, who we interviewed last month, creates all of her own music for hers. And
I'm not familiar. I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. And what I liked was when I was talking with her, she was just making the music, but then as she got into the later seasons, she started doing like the mood music around some of the storytelling. And so I think it was around season 3, she got to one that was like my absolute favorite, where I just had to stop everything I was doing because the way she put the music around the non-fictional story that she was telling was just absolutely wonderful. So, whether it's I like my paranormal podcast not to have any kind of humor with it. I'm really like, I want to hear the story. I want to hear the opinions behind it. And so
absolutely.
Music can always factor into that as well. It definitely sets the mood.
Yeah, I just realized I should probably be drawing. Just sitting here chatting away. And it's typical male thing, isn't it? We can't do 2 things at once. So there's going to be a challenge, but we'll see. I was just saying earlier before we went live, I've drawn live. Well, I say live, I've drawn in person at Comic-Con in San Diego for 11 years in a row. And you've got Tom, Dick, and Harry and Jennifer and whoever coming by asking you questions while you're trying to draw. So it is distracting because it's hard to sort of concentrate on one thing and not be ignorant. I always try and make eye contact with who I'm talking to, because there's nothing worse than looking at the top of someone's head when you're talking to them. So it's tricky, but I'll begin something, I suppose. So feel free to chat away yourself and tell me anything you want.
No, absolutely. So, the point of having this tonight is to, have Sam's fans come in and watch him do another live drawing, and also have fans of Paranormality Media come in and see the great work that Sam does. And if you're not familiar with Sam's work, he does a lot of the book covers for Beyond the Fray Publishing. I got one right here because I just was talking to Ken Gerhard yesterday. This one, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, which is so far, I'm a quarter way through it, and it is amazing. And I got to, Sam introduced me to Ken Gerhard, and Ken is probably about the nicest person that I've ever met, and is super, super enthusiastic about what he does in cryptozoology. We sat for 2 hours, and I know if I would have kept talking, I could have kept him there for another 2 hours after that. So
yeah, he's a great guy. It's super lovely guy.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. And the book cover that you did for him was just wonderful. I love it. I guess part of my favorite thing that I like about it is whenever I look at a lot of your artwork, you usually do kind of more of like a bust sometimes,
Yeah. A lot of it's very, I've been told that someone pointed out that I like symmetry. They see a lot of symmetry in my work. Yes. And I've never noticed it until now.
But on this one, I guess in particular, I mean, you definitely had the full body Sasquatch and then the full body human. Very good artwork there, I'll say. I mean,
thanks. I tried.
It's a tried. And then Ken was like, well, look at the back, because he did all this too.
I always try and do a wraparound on a book cover. I think it's an awful waste of space when there isn't one. When it's just text, and for the most part, you have to put your blurb on the back of a book, don't you? So people know what it's about. But I think it's also nice when it does wrap around as one image. So try and do that with a lot of David Weatherly's books. I've done a lot. I think I've done close to almost 20 books for him now, book covers. But if you're into cryptozoology and you want to start collecting those, that's an author to look for, David Weatherly. He's on Amazon. We're both working on, he's working on rather, the Monster series for every single state in the US, and maybe then some. So he's teamed up with me to have me do all the book covers for all 50 states. And each state, they have various different cryptids and mysteries and legends, both cryptozoology and hauntings and all kinds of things. So he's sort of trying to get the best of the best crop from each state and put it all in one book. There are other authors who've done sort of all the states in America. I know Kenny Irish did He's done all the states of America, cryptozoology, purely that, I think it's just cryptozoology. And he's done a phenomenal book on that. Nothing to do with me, by the way, but he's not a great guy. But David's doing a book for every single state. So it's going to be one hell of a shelf collection, the Weatherly collection on your shelf at home one day, that'll be fun. And every cover features a particular cryptid from each state. So I think, what was the last one? I've done so many now.
Oh, you've already started doing.
Oh, we're on book 7. I'm just finishing book 8.
Oh man.
So the first 7 are up on Amazon now, and we've done so far Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada. See, I forget. It's terrible. But I'm sure you can find them. The next one is the Lizard Man, I believe. Probably shouldn't have announced that, but there you go. You heard it here first. Lizard Man.
The Lizard Man, the one that Lyle Blackburn wrote a book
Yes.
about? Okay.
From Scape Swamp.
Yes.
And I believe, I heard this on a podcast. I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been Expanded Perspectives with Cam and Kyle, Cameron Hale, and Kyle Filson. Expanded Perspectives, there's a great podcast. Addicted to them too. Those are great guys. It may have been on their podcast. See, I'm rambling now. I'm trying to remember what it is. But somebody mentioned Scape Swamp. It gets its name because it was originally called Escaped Whore Swamp, because it comes from an awful period of history where people were, enslaved and that kind of thing. And so that's where the swamp got its name, and they've obviously changed it over time to Scape Whore, which is better, isn't it? But yeah, there's a lizard man walking around there for some reason. Nobody knows why.
Yes, I was just watching a TV show on that one the other day, and that poor high school kid broke down on the side of the road in the swamp, and then got done changing his tire, and then stands up to see this thing is like right there in front of him, like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even imagine that. Yeah.
It's not what you want to see on a Friday night.
No, but yeah, speaking of David Weatherly, I believe one of our content providers, Aaron Deese from Hey Strangeness, just did an interview with him today.
Oh, great.
For the magazine. So
Aaron's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got Ken and David will be in this issue that will be featuring you. So there you go. We got your work everywhere on this one.
Wow. That's, that's all we want, isn't it? Yeah, David and Ken, 2 great guys. They should have a TV show together where it's kind of like a good cop, bad cop, except they're both good cops.
We'll just call it a couple of nice guys.
Yeah. Crypto nice guy hunt, something. I'm sure someone can come up with a better name than that. But yeah, that's something I'd like to see is a TV show with everybody and anyone who's ever been involved with it, rather than having sort of one person running the show that kind of you've seen everywhere before, but have every single episode with a special guest that then joins them, and then the next guest is someone else, almost like the Littlest Hobo, But maybe they could go to the island of Flores and find the little hobbits, the sort of Littlefoot, Bigfoots, the little ones. And you could call it the Littlest Homo, because it's Homo floresiensis. Yeah. Terrible. But you could have a whole, that could be the psychic, couldn't it? He could come along for the journey. What was that TV show in the 70s with a little Bigfoot that was, or was it a boy and a Bigfoot?
Well, I guess talking to someone that actually has seen a Bigfoot on, he was on ITF 286. Jake Dressel was saying that him and his wife on 2 separate occasions saw what appeared to be a Littlefoot.
I remember that. Yeah. I did. I listened to that episode. That was That's one of my favorites, actually. That's a fantastic episode. Yeah, I've spoken to him. Shannon did a sort of a Zoom meeting with everybody on her Patreon.
Yeah.
We're into the fray. And, you know, he was talking about it again. And so that's fascinating. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, the Littlefoot. And he mentioned that I guess they were cruising the cable channels and came across Return of the Jedi and saw the Ewoks.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's kind of what it is. It was Ewok-like.
Yeah. And didn't his wife see it sort of first and didn't want to say anything? Or he had seen it and didn't want to tell his wife, and she said, oh yeah, I'd seen it too. And it's one of those situations where you see something so strange and you feel silly telling someone because you think, people just going to think I'm crazy, aren't they? No one's going to believe me. But people see these things.
Yeah, they saw them, and I know Jake's probably gonna get back. I wonder if he's watching, but yeah, it was. I think it was. She saw it first, and then he saw it, and then he described what he saw to her, and then she collaborated on it.
Yeah, it's and it seemed to be because they're not exactly out in the middle of nowhere, are they?
No, they're just outside of Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, so it's not as though they live in the middle of a forest.
No.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Hey, we got our first question for tonight. This one is from A.E. Lloyd. So I'm guessing that's Addie Lloyd, who's a researcher for Monsters Among Us podcast. And she asked, Sam, who influenced you as a young artist?
Ooh, excuse me, Simon Bisley. 100%. I've met him twice, not very many times, but Simon Bisley, a fellow British artist, probably most famously known for his work that's been featured in Heavy Metal magazine over the years on the covers and things. He also illustrated Slain and 2000 AD kind of things. Simon Bisley, absolutely phenomenal, really gritty, dirty artwork, very exaggerated features, lots of chains and spikes, and typical sort of 80s iconography of babes with big boobs and giant guns, and monsters, of course, lots of monsters. But Simon Bisley is one of those guys where, like any good artist that sort of catches your attention, you see his work and you know it's his straight away. But yeah, absolutely. Growing up as a teenager, I used to look at those amazing images of, you know, big gauntlets, fists with spikes on them. And it was almost as though Frank Frazetta went punk and got a bit edgy. And even, you know, Frank Frazetta is phenomenal. I remember looking at his, you know, very curvaceous women and dragons and things, and big swords and sort of medieval, lots of Lord of the Rings kind of imagery. And I think Simon Bisley took it to the next level. Well, he was the next generation. He was the next Frazetta, really, in my mind. But, you know, beyond that, Ashley Wood, another phenomenal sort of very messy, dirty, full of energy. You can see the sort of the brush strokes and the pencil strokes are almost like individual thoughts as he's doing it. You know, it's really rough and ready, but the imagery looks alive. So check out Ashley Wood. And there's a whole host of others that I couldn't remember. So it's always that when your mind goes blank, isn't it? And everybody loves Salvador Dali and H.R. Giger, whatever you want to call him. And, you know, but those are sort of, it's almost cliche at this point, isn't it? When you say, oh, I love Dali. Who doesn't? So I always like to sort of find not obscure artists, because Simon Bisley and Frazetta, of course, are not obscure by any means. But not everybody's familiar with those. They're not as mainstream as Dali. And I like to find other artists that are really unusual. Charlie Lister's another one. He does these really tight illustrations, very surreal puppetry, kind of Pinocchio monster type things with little faces and wooden masks, and his work's amazing. And failing that, you know, of course, you have Brett Manning, Absolutely in love with her work. Her and of course, yeah, she's obviously going to remind me of Brian Froud because they both work heavily in fairy folklore and mythology, and everything she draws has a very fairy orientated sort of theme to it. Lots of little dryads and pixies and gnomes and creatures. And it's nice to sort of, she's completely different to Brian Froud in style, but she's so prolific. She must put out several drawings a day. I don't know how she does it, but she has so many of these little creatures. She's putting out a couple of books, I believe, fairly soon, sort of encyclopedias of fairies and fae folk and those kind of creatures. So look out for Brett Manning. Absolutely. Brett is a girl, by the way.
And I think that's her website, isn't it? It's Brett is a girl.
It might be brettmanningart.com. But Brett is a girl may very well be the website address as well. I'm not sure. Is that her Instagram?
That might be her Instagram. But I do remember one of them is Brett is a girl.
I should know. She's a friend.
Yeah, she had a pretty good sale last Friday. I wanted to get in on some of her stuff, and she had a 3 p.m. release, and within 15 minutes, everything's gone. So she's been doing pretty good for herself.
Of course, I missed that, didn't I?
I think the world missed that.
Yeah. So, you should sell more stuff, Brett. Shame on you. We're missing out.
No, but absolutely love her stuff with the fairies and the fae folk. One picture she did in particular I enjoyed was this. She has it's like a one-eyed wolf, but like the one eye centered, but it's like inverted, so it doesn't open and close like that. It's like
right,
like that,
like a third eye thing,
kind of like a third eye, but like that's the only eye, and it's like right there in the middle. And
oh wow, yeah, good old Brett. She's got some really. She's she's one of those artists, isn't she, where she'll create something and you think, I wish I thought that. There's a few artists out there that do that. Wish I thought that.
So you want to tell us a little bit about this fellow you're drawing right now?
This is a very tired man. He's so tired and old. He's long in the tooth. Not entirely sure what he is. Some kind of undead person, creature thing. That's the other thing. When I go live, usually every Wednesday via Patreon, if anyone wants to do this again, I go live every Wednesday, so it's 4 times a month. And every time I'll do something completely different from scratch. And while we're here, maybe I'll show you. I'll just go through my sketchbook, what we've done over the last couple of weeks, if we can see that.
Yeah, we can see that.
So that was this Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to go pretty quick because there's quite a lot.
I remember that one.
And we're sort of going back in time here. Sort of every week. There's Darley, of course. Speaking of Darley. There's a bit of a shine on these. I'll hold it that way. So yeah, every Wednesday I'll do something for, an hour or two. Usually about an hour or an hour and a half. And then what I do afterwards is sort of another additional 10 minutes. I'll just go on Instagram so people can see what they missed out on Patreon. For all those wonderful people who like to support artwork and fuel me in terms of buying tea. It's very expensive. I drink lots of it, so it's pretty essential to have a Patreon so that I can afford tea. I'm joking, of course.
Yes, you got to have that tea for those, sunny.
Well, I think it's a British
105 degrees.
It's like oxygen to me. I feel forlorn and what's the word? I guess just depressed if I don't have tea. It's a sad day. It's a very boring, mournful day until you have a cup of tea, and then everything's great. And it works different from coffee. People sort of get stressed when they have a coffee, or when they don't have a coffee rather, and they always sort of, oh, I'm grumpy in the morning until I've had my coffee, and you just think, see, look at that, all these are weeks and weeks and weeks, all in one book. Yeah, and then when people sort of finally have their coffee, they're not angry anymore, and that doesn't work with tea. Tea, you just, well, for me anyway, personally, I just feel really down until I've had a cup of tea. I'm not even drinking tea now though, drinking orange juice.
Oh, see, my grandmother was the same way with Dr. Pepper. She wasn't right until she had her Dr. Pepper.
Huh. I don't like Dr. Pepper. People say what's the worst that could happen, but
well, that was an old thing. Was I think it was 10, 2, and 4 was an old ad from the 50s or 60s where you had to have a Dr. Pepper at 10, 2, and 4, and they even had Dr. Pepper clocks that had 10, 2, and 4 marks. So that was my grandma's regimen, was
10, 2, and 4. Goodness me. Yeah, I don't particularly like the flavor. Not a fan of cherry either. That kind of, I don't know. I like strawberry, but not as a drink. Also, ice cream's good. It's making me hungry now.
Well, I got another question for you. This one comes from Mr. Ken Gerhard. Yesterday, we were talking about you. And Ken asked, Sam, out of all the cryptids you draw, what is your favorite cryptid?
Goodness me, Ken Gerhard, how dare you?
Because you did his Loch Ness Monster, you did his
yeah. I've done a couple of illustrations for his books. I mean, I think, see, the most favorite one to draw versus my favorite cryptid, that's a tough one. What would I say for either answer? I love illustrating anything that's more monstrous and surreal. I've always said I don't like drawing bowls of fruit because you see that every day, and it absolutely infuriates me when someone, you'll see these things on Instagram and Facebook where someone's done this like huge painting and it's a hand holding a glass of whiskey or something, or it's a woman with a daisy, and it's photographically just flawless. It's perfect. It looks like a blown up photograph, but they've actually hand painted it. Well, that's phenomenal skill. Congratulations, you're a human camera, but that's boring to me. That's just, why? To me, that's a waste of time. Absolute waste of time. When you've got that amount of skill, why not do something that you don't see every day? Like Geiger would do, or Dali again, and Bisley. You exaggerate those features, make it more interesting. So to draw a cryptid, Bigfoot's always fun, but at the end of the day, it's just a hominid, some homo, something gigantic, ape man. So it's fun to illustrate. It's probably my favorite cryptid because it's, I think, ironically, the most overlooked in terms of people taking it seriously and actually making a conservative effort to find them. Some would argue, the Olympic Project's doing a great job and there's this, that, and the other. But BFRO, the list is endless of people looking for them. But I think, if Richard Branson or someone put the money in and said, here's $1 billion, go find me a Sasquatch, would we find one? You go down a rabbit hole. Are we allowed to find one? Does the government know? Would we be stopped from searching? If you got too close, would they take it off you? That kind of thing. Who knows? It's all exciting. I'm sure there's a few movies that have done that. There's more than 400 Bigfoot movies, so I'm sure that's in one of those B movies. But a favorite one to draw, I always go with something that you've never really seen before, something like a vampire. Or a werewolf, or something that's a real stretch of the imagination. That's something that you can't just flip through a catalog of bowls of fruit and see every day. So what would be my answer? Bigfoot and Vampires. How about a vampire Bigfoot?
Vampire Bigfoot.
I mean, there's a movie.
There you go. It might already be a movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it could be, actually. Copyright something that already exists. Nos for Sasquatch. Squatch Ferratu. Yeah. I don't know. It's
so speaking of like cryptids, and you are,
I'm not a cryptid.
Yeah, well, you're almost. If you're making
I'm rare, that's for sure. Seldom ever seen.
Well, I got another listener question or viewer question. I'm sorry. Have you ever had a paranormal experience?
Hundreds.
Every day. Wakes up.
No, genuinely. I mean, not hundreds, but I could write a book on the amount of weird things that have happened to me. I've spoken about this on a couple of podcasts before. There's a funny interview on, I think it's from 2017 maybe, but Where Did the Road Go with Sarai Asker. That's on YouTube, where I talk about giant dragonflies chasing me when I was a kid that I thought were model airplanes, ghosts visiting me in my bedroom when I was 7 years old, children, green fireballs, that kind of thing. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff, but I've definitely seen a number of UFOs in terms of, I don't know what they were, and they certainly weren't aircraft to my knowledge. I think the most impressive one in terms of UFOs was 2012 in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. I was staying at a friend's house. We'd gone over and decided to carve pumpkins, and we'd gone out onto the balcony. As soon as we got there, a couple of the guys were having cigarettes. So I stepped out with them and had a little chat, looked over the balcony, and we'd been there like a second, and my friend points up into the sky and says, what the F is that? And sure enough, there's a big V-shaped formation of lights, typical of a sort of black triangle, just enormous, going right over Hollywood. And I don't know why more people didn't see it. But then nobody looks up. Everyone's looking at their phones these days. So that happened, and all three of us saw it. So it wasn't me going crazy. That was a real thing. And, people are like, oh, it was a B-2 bomber. No, it wasn't. It was not a B-2 bomber. The lights weren't flashing. It didn't make any noise. It drifted, much like a dirigible, some kind of Zeppelin would float, that kind of speed. Really way up in the sky, though. So if you blinked, you'd lose it. And it was dimmer than the actual stars. So these lights weren't flashing, but they were all white in a V shape. And it just looked, for how far away it was, it looked massive, absolutely massive. And the commercial airplanes were below it, just doing their thing around LAX or what have you. And so who knows what that was, whether it was a military test to see if people would see it. I don't know. We saw it. We even called a local air base. My friend's quite knowledgeable in that sort of military aspect of things. And the guy on the phone said that we were the fifth person who'd called that night. That they didn't know what it was. It wasn't theirs, and he hung up. We tried to chase that up and could never find it again, or who that was, or there was no report of it. It just sort of disappeared. But it absolutely happened, and that was in 2012, which is funny because in 2010, and here's the really interesting part. A couple of years later, I was watching that amusing entertainment show, Ancient Aliens, which is, of course, full of inaccuracies and what have you. It is purely entertainment, so we'll let them off. But they featured some news footage which had been taken in 2010, so 2 years prior to our sighting, of a series of a V shape of lights over the volcano in Iceland that erupted in 2010 in Reykjavik. And the news helicopter sort of filming the volcano, and way off in the plume of the volcano ash, all this gray, big, almost like an A-bomb shape coming out of the volcano mountain, is this little V shape, but it isn't like traveling, it's just hanging in midair. And to my knowledge, there's, you know, no airplane that can really do that unless it's the Osprey with the propellers or whatever. So this V shape of lights doesn't even look like a solid craft, though. It just looks like lights, almost like a flock of birds. But then a flock of birds wouldn't be flying that close to a volcano, and a V-shaped flock of birds don't hang in the air either. But that's kind of what it looked like in terms of a shape. And they were just white lights. And when I saw this on Ancient Aliens, I nearly fell off my chair, because it was exactly what we had seen in 2012, but over Hollywood. And I got on the phone to my friend. I was like, oh my God, you got to look at this episode of Ancient Aliens, yada, yada, yada. And then I went on YouTube and I found the actual news footage itself, so I could just watch that clip over and over and over. And you can go and look for yourself on YouTube. Just look for the UFO over Icelandic volcano 2010. You'll find it. There's various clips actually from different angles. And you get people saying, you know, oh yeah, it's a flock of birds, and you know, that's all it was. But again, you know, I don't, to my knowledge, I don't think birds can just hang in a V formation in midair. They just don't do that, unless it's a very well organized flock of eagles that are all going to dive on the same rabbit. I'm pretty sure they don't do that. So yeah, that happened. So for me, that was confirmation in terms of whatever we saw had been seen already 2 years prior. And I was unaware of it until that point, watching it on Ancient Aliens. I just thought, wow, look at that. I mean, of course, I remember the volcano erupting. But yeah, that was weird, very weird. Makes you wonder, whose was it?
Yeah, that's actually probably one of the most popular sightings is a black triangle with the dim lights. It doesn't make any noise, and people either see it like really high up or really low. And I believe your buddy Ryan Sprague
that's
did
right.
an episode with someone that's kind of a special, I don't know if you call them specialists because no one really knows what these things are, but it's someone that's done extensive research into that thing. And you know, it's been cited since the 50s, so it's very commonly seen, probably more than the flying saucer, I would assume.
Yeah, I think excuse me, looking away, did you catch that? Yeah, I think Ryan saw if not a triangle, although I think it might have been a triangle. He had his own sighting when he was younger over a lake, way up in the north where he's from. And I think he was with his dad, although I don't think his dad saw it. But he said he'd seen this thing go over a lake above him into the mountains, whatever. And it was massive. And, you know, as you say, these things have been around for God knows whatever. And people say, oh, well, it's, you know, it's military aircraft. Well, the things that these craft are reported doing, where they'll zip off in a second, I don't think you can do that now, never mind in the 1950s. So, you know, even these sort of the popular current thing with the Tic Tac where things are zipping around things have been seen, since the 40s and 50s as well. And we absolutely didn't have aircraft that could do anything close to that. So it's not the military. And if it was, even back then, why do we not have a technology now that's been released? Because, you know, you think about the Blackbird, the big, was it the SR-70 something? It was a secret stealth plane that was flying around over Russia from America, flying over, taking photographs. And they didn't know it was there. And it was a secret for 30 years, 3 decades, before they said, you know, oh yeah, it's ours. It's called the Blackbird. And it was just, essentially, it just looked like a black Concorde. or the, in the comic books, the Marvel X-Men comic books, they have the Blackbird as their sort of ship in the movies, where they make out as though Beast had invented it and created this incredible aircraft. And that's how crazy it was. It's so far out there. But they eventually said, yeah, it's ours. But if we have some crazy technology that's been flying around since the 40s, you would think that they would have announced it by now and said, this is what we're using, or it would have been seen or caught on camera, or some spy would have leaked it or something, but we don't have anything that does that. Drones don't even do that. We've got some pretty incredible drone military aircraft up in space that fly around for years without any pilots. And that's pretty interesting. It does make you wonder, what else do they have now? But in the 50s, there's no way. There's no way.
Well, we got another question. This one is from Anna Mayalo, and it's not an art related.
Anna.
You know Anna?
Anna.
Hope I didn't butcher your last name.
Anna Mayalo.
Anna Mayalo. Not an art related question. You live a long, happy life. Then you come back as a ghost. Are you a friendly ghost, Casper type ghost, or a hiding car keys, slamming doors kind of ghost? This would make a great movie, actually. If I was in a position where I could come back and haunt anyone and do anything, and of course that's for all eternity, why wouldn't you be both? You could be a helpful ghost to all your friends and family, or you could even be a political ghost and make things happen in different ways, shut pipelines off, or whatever. Or you could be an absolute vengeful ghost and just ruin everything for everybody, knock over mugs of tea onto laptops and pull out people's hair when they're not looking. You do all kinds of things. I just what a question is that? It's too much fun. I think I'd be a mischievous ghost, let's be fair. And that would be the movie.
The Mischievous Ghost. Mister Sam Shearon, the Mischievous Ghost.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Up to no good in your neighborhood.
It wouldn't be Casper, it'd be Asshole. Asper.
Asper.
That's a bit like Asperg, isn't it? Who was a Nazi. Well, Nazi sympathizer, I think. What's the difference? Let's be fair.
So, no. All right, we got another question here. Where do you get your ideas for your drawings? And that's one I always like to ask too, for like an artist. Where do you get your ideas from your drawings? Is it already conjured up in your head, or does it not take shape until it meets the paper?
Well, that's a good question, because you could I could answer that and just be pretentious and say, oh, I just pulled it out of my head. But I do. Everything I draw is all, if you imagine I have a filing cabinet in my head full of reference material, and without sounding pretentious, I've got a pretty good memory. So if I go to a museum and I look at a big dinosaur skeleton or some piece of taxidermy, I've looked at them so many times through books and visiting museums and things that have a good kind of an understanding of anatomy, and a good reference collection, shall we say, of mythology. And in terms of cryptozoology and folklore and mythology and things that don't exist, in terms of we don't have one on a table to cut open scientifically, say a griffin, for example, half lion, half eagle. Well, in order to draw that, you're going to need to know what an eagle and a lion looks like. But then to put them together, you need to sort of strip away the skin and the muscles and everything, and see the similarities in biology of how they would connect and how they would work. And so when I'm illustrating out of my head, I'm always using the sort of biology books and references in those filing cabinets in my brain as to what, even on a hand, like how long should this bone be compared to this bone, and how many of these bones are there, and what veins are connected to there. So you can start to exaggerate, much like when Simon Bisley is drawing a figure, he'll do really exaggerated features on women, much like Frazetta did with the curves, you know, big bust, big thighs, tiny waist, and make it really exaggerated, because you don't see that every day. It's kind of a poetic ideal. It's a sort of a statuette idea of what is the most extreme in something. And so drawing straight out of my head, it's not plucking it out of thin air. It is a reference-based thing, but I'll never sort of copy something. I'll never steal an idea, or I'll never directly lift something, because what's the point, you know? And it annoys me when I see other artists do that, where they will just, unless it's a specific homage to something that exists, you know, so say you're going to do your version of the Mona Lisa, but as Cthulhu, maybe. That's different. That's fun. That's parody, and that's clever. But when someone's just, you know, if you take a Mona Lisa and then you just recreate the Mona Lisa, that's really annoying. It drives me mad. I've seen other artists create pieces and put them on Instagram, and people have tagged me in it and said, "Is this your work?" And I've looked at it, and and it's not my work, but it's copied, identical drawing, albeit in their style, or you know, whatever. And it's an insult, really, because they're then playing off that it's their work, and it isn't. And that happens a lot. That happens with the plagiarism of a lot of artists goes on into people selling merchandise, and you have these foreign companies that you unfortunately can't shut down. Brett Manning has a lot of her artwork appear on clothing in shops abroad that are really just ripping people off. The clothing doesn't exist, people will pay for it, and then it never arrives, and there's all kinds of scams and that kind of thing going on. So it's tricky to kind of you know, not have your work ripped off. So it's not something that I'm even consciously aware of doing, in terms of like, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, I have to be careful and not copy someone. You know, you just don't. Why would you? I think if you copy someone, it's just shameful, really. It's not impressive. You know, again, it's like the human camera thing. You know, you could be the most skilled person in the world, but why bother copying something that already exists? I do prefer to draw straight from my head rather than a reference. And in terms of ideas, I will be influenced by people like Simon Bisley or Dali or Ashley Wood or whoever. Even Brett Manning is an influence. You know, I love her work. I think, oh, I wished I'd thought of that. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go and then do an exact copy of that. I may take a little influence of it and go, how can I work that into something of my own and do my own spin on the idea, the concept, not the actual piece? Because there's nothing worse than seeing a piece of artwork where it's just obviously copied. It's not impressive. There's a lot of photographers that do that as well. They'll try and emulate or sort of just straight up copy the same idea, lighting, the set, the colors of someone else who's really good at that photography, who's clearly got that style down and that's theirs. And you see another photographer try and copy it, and it's cringy. You know, it's embarrassing. It's like, why would you do that? It's not impressive, and it's cheap.
How often do you see your artwork copied?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a tricky one, because on the one hand, I could Google right now and find my rendition of Edgar Allan Poe, which when I did the digital painting of him and H.P. Lovecraft, I used multiple references. I had almost like a thought board, a pinboard of all different photographs throughout history and other paintings of Edgar Allan Poe in order to really understand his face and find out who he was in as many details as I could find. And then I recreated his image using as much reference as I could to make him look as lifelike as I could. And it's one of my favorite pieces, one of the most popular pieces I've done, which is why I then did H.P. Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley as sort of companion pieces in a way, as prints. But they have also appeared online on book covers, posters, you name it. and like I say, you could Google now and find that, you know, Poe thing on a book cover, which I have not authorized, and people are selling books online using my artwork. And we've, you know, thankfully I've got a great manager who can just like shut that down and, you know, remove it. But it does happen a lot. It does happen. I remember walking through the streets of North Hollywood, just on the way to, I think it was a friend of mine was at a recording studio. So I was just walking down there, getting a coffee. I just got out of an Uber. And I was walking down the street, and I mean, Los Angeles is huge. It's a big sprawling city, you know, but of all the places that I would just by chance walk by was a small theater, little black box theater in North Hollywood. And outside there was a huge tarpaulin type printout of my Edgar Allan Poe portrait, advertising a show that they were doing, reciting Poe stories and poetries and kind of thing. And so they got a Poe lookalike, which turned out to be one of his descendants, apparently, whatever. But he was performing at this theater, and they had used my portrait to advertise it. And I thought, you know, what are the chances in the whole of Los Angeles that I would run into that? And it was as though I was meant to see it, you know. But yeah, it happened a lot. Really weird.
Well, we got a question from Patrick O'Neill.
Patrick O'Neill, I know him.
Okay.
Hello.
Patrick asked, what do you think of the game The Witcher 3 or the game Witcher 3?
I have not had the pleasure of playing a video game in probably 15 years or something. I don't play video games. It looks nice, and I envy anyone who has the time to set aside and play. I don't think playing video games is a waste of time, because, you know, it's a way to unwind and enjoy yourself, isn't it? So it's not a waste of time. It's something that you shouldn't do every day for 9 hours. But I've been considering getting a PlayStation 5 106 or whatever they're up to now, just to sort of have that outlet to sort of switch away from my work, because it's good to escape and sort of change your visions or whatever. I'll watch Josh Gates quite a lot of an evening, because it takes me away. It's another place to explore and relax, and video games definitely will do that for me. But I've not played anything. I like the TV show. I thought that was fun. It was interesting. But apart from the dragons, they look kind of hokey. It could have been better designed. Really bad CGI. I mean, after Game of Thrones, you know, you kind of have to step up a bit, don't you? Because they were pretty perfect. Even though Richard Freeman would probably argue they weren't dragons specifically, they were more wyverns. But yeah. The Witcher 3, I don't know. Long-winded question there. It looks good. Maybe I'll talk to you later and you can tell me what you think of it, Patrick.
Yeah, so very interesting video games. Avid fan of them myself. Then I had kids, and probably in the past 8 years have logged in about 4 hours.
Now you hate video games because they're on them all the time.
Well, no, they're not on them all the time. They're
Oh.
tablet children that watch YouTube or whatever. But I just never have time to play anymore. I wish I did. I think last time I got that time in was I sent them away to the grandma's, and I was like, okay, great. From 8 to 11 Saturday morning was video games. Then after that, chores. So you got to schedule it in there. But it is, like you said, it is a great release. And it's thought provoking, and it's enjoyable. And now they got them so real nowadays.
Well, yeah,
the animation, that it's almost
beautiful
lifelike.
artwork.
Yeah,
it is. It's but again, you can kind of sway. How do I say this? I read a lot of books on ghosts and things and Bigfoot, and I have my little book collections here and there and everywhere, piles of them. But those will definitely influence my thinking, and I'll go back to that reference I was talking about where I have a filing cabinet of visual information. So when I'm reading a book, whether it's a Lovecraft story or it's a true ghost story, I'll have all that information in my head. And I think with a video game, the danger there for me would be that I would start soaking up that information visually, and I would start sort of filing that away in my head. Excuse me. And I think the problem with that is then the danger, I'll be running the risk of unconsciously drawing something that I've previously seen in a video game. And that's a worry for me, because as much as on the one hand, I do have a good memory, I also don't for other things. So it sounds like an excuse, doesn't it? Where I'll draw something and someone will be like, "Oh, that's from a video game," and I'll have no idea what they're talking about, and then I'll remember it. I could see that happening. That would be a problem. I'd have to switch off and say, okay, don't file this information away, because they are beautiful. They are really realistic. All the World of Warcraft stuff's beautiful as well. All the designs. I love Dungeons and Dragons. Just as sort of tabletop games, all the books and things like that. I used to, growing up, Games Workshop and Warhammer, all the Citadel miniatures, all those kind of things. I used to love those. My cousins were also big fans of that kind of stuff. So we'd always have lots to sort of visually be inspired. And that all comes from Lord of the Rings kind of history and descriptions. But again, on video games, I always sort of think, well, I feel a little bit guilty playing a video game or winding down. Sometimes I'll like I say, I'll watch Josh Gates of an evening, but sometimes I won't, because I know I have, an album cover to finish or something, and I'll feel guilty and I'll get anxiety. So I won't enjoy what I'm watching. And I don't think I would enjoy a video game when I've got that niggling workaholic thing in the back of my head saying, you should be working. I feel I do get that little guilty vibe, but it's my own, I don't take enough breaks. That's the thing. There's no such thing as a day off. I think.
Well, we got another. We got another question for you. Back on books. This one's from Hey Strangeness. He wants to know, who are some of your favorites? Who is Hey Strangeness? Aaron Deese has his own podcast and also does content providing for Paranormality Media. And he wants to know, who are some of your favorite writers?
Now there is a question. That's a tough one. It's tricky because I read so many different stories from so many unknown authors, little ghost stories. I'll buy Creeps magazine, which is turning into Shudder magazine, but all these little pulp type ghost stories that you'll find, 10 to the dozen of them, or Bigfoot stories and things. I do prefer a lot of factual science-based books rather than fiction. I'll be in bed reading a book on ghosts, but it'll be from a scientific point of view. Some people might laugh at that scientific point of view of ghosts. What? But there are just tomes and tomes and tomes of study going back hundreds of years. A lot of them from a spiritualist point of view, which is not really my cup of tea, because it's all about Jesus. That's fine. But to me, that has nothing to do with ghosts. Unless you're talking about the Holy Ghost, and I wouldn't want to read about that because it's boring. No offense to anybody, but ghosts for me, if I'm going to read about them, fictional stories are good. If you're going to read any, Edgar Allan Poe, or even Bram Stoker, if you want to read some of the classic stuff, that's probably better than your more modern stuff. Although saying that, forget the guy's name. I just bought a book of 101 ghost stories, and they are fictional. Anyway, I don't know. Let's say H.P. Lovecraft, because it's weird, and it's a really weird style of writing, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes because the descriptions are so vague and weird. But yeah, H.P. Lovecraft, you kind of have to take it with a pinch of salt and sort of imagine it being of a different time and a different way of thinking, because he had certain views that were not everybody's cup of tea. a bit racist. But then I always say, so was everybody back then. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people were. So I think anyone who knocks Lovecraft for being a racist, it's kind of silly, because his stories are fantastic. And if you can look past, separate the art from the artist kind of thing, the stories are pretty fantastic. Iconic monsters. So I'd say H.P. Lovecraft and Poe and Stoker. Stoker's pretty good too.
So that's got me onto something.
Racism?
No. Speaking of racist, no. When you're working with an author, how much influence do they give you when you're coming up with like the cover or like the cryptid, when you're working with David Weatherly and he's like, well, I want to do the skateboard lizard man. Do you do your own research, or does he have something that he hands you read it and you kind of kind of use that as a guide for your illustration?
Well, I mean, generally what happens is, with David specifically, he'll say, as you say, we're going to be doing this state next. And so it could be Alabama or whatever. And I'll say, oh, great. Well, what cryptid do you have in mind for the cover of that? And he'll name one and he'll say, have you heard of it? And, more often than not, because obviously I love cryptozoology, I will have already have heard of it and I'm pretty familiar with the story. But as we know, there's, I personally have catalogued over 400 different cryptids. And it's my aim at some point to illustrate them all. But that aside, I do have a good understanding for most of these more famous, shall we say, cryptids. And so it's kind of, he'll just say, oh, we're going to do this one. So say for the example, the lizard man, I may have a general understanding for what it is, but I will always go away and double check and rebuffer everything that I know about it. And I'll always dig up something I didn't know. That's the fun part of it. That's the real enjoying part of illustrating a new cryptid, is making sure that it's as loyal to the description of the witness as possible, because it's all very well to sort of illustrate it in such a way that's, oh, that looks cool, or it looks scary, or make it as weird as possible, or make it match the current popular depiction of it, but I prefer to go along the lines of realism. As I said before, I prefer fact over fiction. And so as much as, and again, people will laugh at this, as much as people will have an understanding of what Bigfoot looks like based on the beef jerky commercial or a movie, I will look at it from an anthropological sort of standpoint. Without sounding pretentious, I'll try and look at it as a sort of, well, what's the best way to portray this creature? Because say for Bigfoot, examples have a hooded nose, like we have our nostrils pointed down, whereas gorillas have their nostrils open and they're very, wide and open nostrils and flat, like a chimp as well. Whereas Bigfoot have human noses, which are hooded and they point downwards. So to illustrate a Bigfoot, I would always put, even if it's someone of African origin that do have wider, bigger noses, they still have the hooded nose, like mine. And so Homo sapien nose is still going to be different from a gorilla nose. And so I'll put that on a gorilla's face and then change the bone structure slightly, make the jaw bigger, but it's essentially a person. And so that's always fun to really dig in and find details that someone may have, mentioned in a witness report. And that's always sketchy as well, speaking of sketches, because you're going to have a witness that will have their own filing cabinet cocktail of memories and visual reference that they've seen before. Perfect example is case of the chupacabra, the goat sucker. The woman who first really brought it into the mainstream in 1995. She had described it as this kind of alien-looking being with spines coming out of its back and all that kind of thing, and it was reptilian-looking and whatever. And it turned out that she had actually watched the movie Species, which was designed by H.R. Geiger, the creature in that. She had watched that movie not too long before she had allegedly seen this chupacabra. So her memories is, you could assume, I'm not saying this is the case, but you could assume, or maybe even accept, that it was probably clouded by the film she'd already seen. So when she sees a porcupine that's perhaps got mange, or it's a starving, aggressive porcupine, who knows, in the backyard, and it's dark, and it hisses at her, maybe she's going to run inside and go, oh my God, I just saw a weird animal. And her catalogue of her memories in her brain will be like slotting in all those pieces to what she thinks she saw. And then, of course, you have this description of the chupacabra. So really, it might not exist at all in that sense. Other people might argue and say, yeah, it's an alien vampire from planet not many goats, or whatever. And and it's here to suck the blood of all the livestock and chickens and what have you. But there's always a shred of truth in there somewhere. But as I say, things will always get exaggerated. So when I'm illustrating something, I'll always look at all the witness reports, but I'll always also try and decode it as well, because you're not entirely able to see what they saw because you weren't there. It's the age-old sort of rule that I run by. When anyone tells me a weird story, you weren't there, so you're not going to know what they saw. And again, you have to take that step back from their standpoint, because they're not going to be, you have people say, oh, I know what I saw. Well, I hate to say it, but nobody knows exactly what they saw unless they've hung out with it and had a coffee with it for an afternoon, because that's not how it happens. Your brain will always fill in the blanks. Even when I saw the UFO over Hollywood, I've obviously filled in visual blanks and markers for what I think I saw. What I actually saw may well have been something completely normal, and I may have subconsciously exaggerated it. I don't think so. And a lot of people will say, oh, I saw a chupacabra. And you could say, don't think you did. But you can never change what they saw because you weren't there. So it's really interesting to pull apart witness descriptions and then illustrate those based on my own knowledge of natural history. So when someone describes a Bigfoot and they say, well, it had really long hair, then I've got to think of, well, what great apes have long hair? Orangutans kind of have dreadlocks every now and then. So maybe it should have more of a flat simian face, and go from there and fill in the blanks based on actual factual knowledge. Factual. So yeah, that's where I draw the line at sort of when someone says, oh, I'm going to do this for the book cover. Can you illustrate this creature? I'll always try and make it as based on fact as we possibly can, so that it's more of a nature documentary rather than a Harry Potter book,
So, so back in 2007, what is it that brought you to LA and have you living there today? Art?
Not the sunshine.
Not the sunshine, not the heat.
Not the women.
Not the women.
Not the alcohol, not the glamour and the glitz.
Great tea drinking weather.
Well, it's funny. I do drink tea every day like an idiot, and I'll sweat because it's usually. I mean, the other day it was. Excuse me, I've got an orange juice burp forming. Excuse me. That was bigger than I expected.
We will edit that out for the podcast.
Let me just refuel that. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Well, it was back in 2007. I'd been doing, this is in the MySpace days. I'd been doing little bits of artwork for bands here and there. And I'd actually been hired by a company called Bravado, which is a merchandise company. And they supply merchandise for everyone from Motorhead to Madonna to, you name it. And I'd been headhunted on MySpace because I'd been posting my artwork on MySpace, and they had contacted me and they said, how would you like to do some artwork for the band HIM? HIM, His Infernal Majesty, I think it was the acronym HIM. Anyway, so I said, yeah, Sure. So I did I think 25 different t-shirt designs, and they were so impressed that they said, "Do you want to do something for Iron Maiden?" So I said, "Oh yeah, all right, that'd be great." So I did a couple of design elements for that. Derek Riggs couldn't do everything. They were bringing Somewhere Back in Time Again tour, and they needed extra merch based on different elements, and there just wasn't the time or the real drive to do that. So they hired me and a couple of other artists to do extra merchandise based on the themes of Iron Maiden that were already in place. So I think I did like a winged scarab beetle for one of them. I got paid a couple of grand, and then I was talking to Jason Charles Miller, singer songwriter, who at the time was the frontman for the industrial band based in LA, Godhead. And they were the first band signed to Marilyn Manson's record label at the time. And we had been friends, and we had sort of stayed in touch. And long story short, he owns a recording studio in North Hollywood with sort of 5 different recording studios, and said, if you ever want to come over to LA, you can stay at the studio, we'll hang out, whatever, and show you around town, kind of thing. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'd just gotten a couple of grand from Iron Maiden merchandise that I'd designed, and I just hopped on a plane in 2007, furthest away from home I'd ever been, and I landed here, and it was a whole new world with a whole new mentality and a different set of rules and different people, and it took a while to learn the American language in terms of how people think and behave and act, because as much as we're all speaking English, it's a totally different culture, completely different, very, very different from home. I think with England, it's not a small country, but it's a hell of a lot smaller than America, and there's not as many opportunities in England in terms of for things that I do. And so I think in England, it's much tougher to get a break over there. Whereas in America, everybody's handing you their business card, and everybody's sharing and involving each other and linking together and making things happen. And it seems to be a very, I would say, progressive country, but that's probably the wrong word to use right now. Seems like we're going backwards in many ways, but it was definitely a place where I thought, I've got to move there, because it's not even about the opportunity. It's well, it is obviously, but it's more to do with I think it's just being able to be in the same room as some of the clients, rather than emailing back and forth. Even though I still do that now, someone could live in the same town as they do, and I'll never meet them. And I've done entire projects that way. But I did a lot of work for Clive Barker. I did some work for Stan Lee, and sitting in Clive's house and seeing his book collections and all of his stuff, and working with his team of people, really kind of put the finger on the pulse a lot easier and a lot quicker. Same with Stan Lee. I was working on the Lucky Man series, and I sat in Stan Lee's office chair, had little white hairs stuck in the back of his seat, and I always wanted to get some tweezers and put them in a little jar so that we could clone him one day. I didn't do that, obviously, but because that's not very nice. But I always thought, oh, look at all these little hairs in the back of his office chair. I could just steal those, but I didn't. Some might say I should have, but I didn't.
Should have stole the whole chair.
Well, yeah, could have. Yeah.
So Clive Barker, did you get to go to his house?
Yeah. Funnily enough, Clive's also from Liverpool, if you didn't know. And I first met him in 2013, Halloween. Perfect time to meet Clive Barker, isn't it? And he was doing a sort of a guest appearance at some, I think it was the Dragonfly Club. and they were doing some sort of charity event. I forget what it was exactly. But he was there, and of course I'd never met him before, and I was a big fan of his work. And I went up and met him and had a little chat and said, I'm also from Liverpool, as Clive is, as I say. And he was like, oh, why are you here? And I said, I do miss the rain in England, and I do miss the cold weather and stuff. And Clive said to me, he looks me in the eye and he sort of stops and looks at me and he goes, what are you, mad? Because it's so, glorious sunshine. He couldn't understand it. He's like, you're mad. But we hit it off, and he took my business card, and I got hired to illustrate his Hellraiser bestiary comic covers. Did some of the work on the books of blood that we had animated, and it was just such a great guy. Good fun, good times.
Yeah.
Went up to his house. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the last interview I did with Sapphire Sandalo, she actually had a story about Clive Barker. One of her friends was
we've all got stories.
Yeah, about a particular painting that he has. So if you ever get a chance to get on the Paranormality magazine podcast, near the end of the one that I do with her, she tells that story, and it chills me to the bone. But I'm not going to bore anybody with that tonight. But it is,
wow,
it's a very good one. So anybody listening or watching tonight, yeah, check that out. Check it out, Sam. We got a question from Jack. Jack wants to know, did you ever meet Rob Zombie?
Yes, I've met Rob a couple of times. It's funny, I did a portrait of John Larry, his guitarist, good old John Five, back in 2008, I think. Anyway, this is again on MySpace, and Rob had said, oh, great work. And we had gotten in touch and started talking, and I did a portrait of Rob in the same sort of style, which ended up being included in his Hellbilly Deluxe 2 album sleeve package, which was great. It was good fun. And then the following year, 2009, I went to San Diego Comic-Con, and I had no idea he was there, but I was wandering around the streets at night, going from bar to bar with friends after the show. I think it was on a Saturday. And of course, San Diego Comic-Con is sort of the whole weekend. So sometimes you're there from Wednesday through to Sunday or Monday even. But the main sort of weekend is the Comic-Con event. And we're wandering around at night, and the streets are bustling, busy in San Diego, gas lamp area.
Yeah.
And we wandered outside the Rock and Blues bar, restaurant, whatever it is. What do they call it? I can't remember now.
I know it's the Gas Lamp District. I'm not familiar with all the bars down there, but I have been to San Diego once.
Anyway, it's the Rock Cafe thing.
The Hard Rock? Or
yeah, there you go, the Hard Rock Cafe.
Okay.
I don't know why that slipped my mind. Probably because I never go. But yeah, he was just wandering around outside down the side alley. And my friend Aaliyah, who I was walking around with at the time, she spotted him, and she says, "Is that Rob Zombie?" And I thought, why would he be out here? And then I thought, why wouldn't he be? And I looked, and sure enough, he was just wandering around outside in an alleyway, side street. And so I went up to him very cautiously because I didn't want to scare him. And I said, "Rob?" And he sort of turned around. He was kind of flustered. And I think he'd locked himself out of his hotel, and he didn't want to go back in the front way. And I think he was texting someone to kind of let him in the back or whatever, because obviously there's lots of people there. And he obviously didn't want to be hassled by, the general public, which is fair enough. I think he's a very to himself person anyway. I don't think he really enjoys that. And all the attention and things. And so we just were like, "How you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I did the portrait thing." And he was like, "Oh, wow, how you doing? Great." And we met there and then in the street, which is really weird. And then I met him again, ran into him in 2014. We were backstage at the Download Donington Festival in England. And he had just played on the main stage, and I was sort of around the back, in the sort of the VIP area, so just hanging around, having a beer or whatever. And there he was again. He had just come off stage and just sort of said hi. But yeah, he's a lovely man. He's super friendly, super nice, very quick-witted, good thinker, very good thinker. He is. I think he has too much imagination and too little time to really push out everything that's in his brain. You can tell from his movies, there's so many things going on that, love them or hate them, there's so many little things left and right that he's kind of putting in there that, you know, there's probably hours and hours of extra stuff that we haven't seen. I'm looking forward to the new Monsters movie that he's been given the green light to do, you know, because there's been other versions of the Monsters since, I know there's been several Addams Family TV shows and stuff, which have not been great. So to see the Monsters get a makeover, and from Rob Zombie, who lives and breathes that commercial Universal Monsters vibe, I think, you know, you can't really fail. I mean, you can, but I have every faith that he's going to do a phenomenal job, and I can't wait to see what he pulls out. I think they're building the entire neighborhood from scratch as well. They're not just doing it on a lot. They've actually got some land and they're building the house, and so it's obviously got quite a budget, which is exciting. But Rob,
yeah, that should be amazing.
Great guy, super nice.
So I guess on the topic of podcast, so you were on a podcast with friends of the show, Shannon LeGros and Ryan Sprague. The
right.
podcast still around, Into the Fray, a very, very popular one.
Yep.
And you were there early on with Into the Fray. I guess tell us a little bit of how you got mixed up into all that.
Wow.
I mean, that's how I discovered you. I'm a big fan of Into the Fray. And then here's Sam, he's on there, and he also does all the artwork for it, you know, which is pretty incredible. So,
well, how it all began a long time ago. I think it was 2014, no, 2015, maybe 2014. I was listening to a podcast called Sasquatch Chronicles, and Woody and Wes Germer, two brothers, and Will Jevning, and there was these three guys. As it is today, Sasquatch Chronicles is just Wes Germer, but originally it was Woody and Wes and Will Jevning, and they would talk about Sasquatch, and they would have, you know, all discussions about sightings and things on it, and it was great. I listened to it all the time. Really enjoyed it. It was fresh, it was new, it was different. And it was full of information that I was not only very much aware of, but was stuff that was happening to other people. And it was new. It was new information, new sightings, which is all really always very exciting for me, rather than listening to the same old story about Ape Canyon or whatever. You know, we've all heard that. I've been there. You know, it's one of those things where I think a lot of podcasts fall into the trap of retelling the same story you've heard on 20 other podcasts. You know, you'll have the classic tropes, and I'll probably cover a lot of them, but I'll certainly do it in a different way. You know, you'll have there'll be an episode of Robert the Doll, or, you know, it'll be the Day at Love Pass, and you'll hear all the same stories on these podcasts. But with Sasquatch Chronicles, it was, as much as they would also cover those things and still do, there were a lot of new stuff. They bring witnesses in on for an interview who are just members of the public. They weren't authors or anything, but they'd had an encounter with Sasquatch. So anyway, long story short, I listened to that all the time. And there was a little bit of a section where Shannon LeGros would be on, and she had her own little segment of the show about Sasquatch and different encounters and things like that. And she'd interview people, and it was fascinating. And she had her own little style of interview, and it was just new, and it was fresh, and it was really informative and good, just entertainingly good, really good to listen to. She has a great voice, very knowledgeable. And then something happened where basically the band broke up. And Sasquatch Chronicles continues today. It's now just Wes Germer. But Shannon had left. Woody, his brother, had left, and Will Jevning had left. And so that was kind of the end of that era for Sasquatch Chronicles. It continues today, as I say, and it's a different show in as much as it's just Wes now, but it's still really good. I would listen to it. I listen to it all the time. And Shannon, I'd been in touch with, I can't even remember why or how, but we were talking about Bigfoot, and she was considering her own show, but didn't want to do just Bigfoot. She wanted to do something different, and she wanted to branch out and start on her own. And I said, well, if you need artwork, let me know. And she said, well, why don't you just do the podcast with me? Why don't you actually just come on and be a co-host? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, yeah, okay, because I know a fair bit about the unexplained. And she said she had a friend called Ryan Sprague, who I wasn't aware of. I hadn't met him or heard of him, but he was really enthusiastic and obsessed with UFOs. And she said, well, he's kind of like the UFO guy, so we're going to bring him on, and he'll be a co-host as well. So it was the three of us. And I did the artwork for the website and the header and designed the logo. And then I think it was 2015, we launched, and Into the Fray was born with Shannon LeGros, Ryan Sprague, and me. And then over time, I think, I can't remember how many episodes we did. We did a ton. We had all kinds of guests on and stuff. We did a few episodes where we had other people come in. Micah Hanks came in on one, and I think that was for St. Patrick's Day at some point. But it was great. It was fun, and we're all still friends to this day. The reason we didn't continue, I had to go to England for a year because I was actually working on a green card so that I could become a permanent resident in America, which I now am. And so I had to go and spend a year there, and it was up in the air, and I was moving, and I had to move my apartment and stuff. And so I had not been on the show for a couple of weeks. And then it just kind of rolled into a couple of months. And then Ryan had gotten busy because he had moved from New York to LA, and then he was moving back to New York. And we kind of just separated and went our own ways. And Shannon kind of held the fort because it's her show. Essentially it's her show from day one. And so with Ryan and myself stepping back, Ryan went on to do his podcast, Somewhere in the Skies, which is phenomenal UFO website, podcast rather. And he has a book out, Into the Fray Publishing, I believe, publishing that as well, Somewhere in the Skies, the book. And he's doing really well doing his podcast, and it's kind of just continued that way. And I've been continuing doing my artwork. I have my green card. I'm now here in Los Angeles permanently. I've been for a while now, 3 or 4 years, with a green card. And it's a case of, well, now I think maybe I'll launch my own podcast. And so that's where we're up to today, in terms of, well, what am I going to do? Because people have said, you have a great voice, or you know so much, or this, that, and the other. Why don't you do a podcast? So for the last year and a half, I've really been toying with it. I bought Micah Hanks's book, A Maverick Guide to Podcasting, available on Amazon. So it's a really good book. It tells you sort of everything you need to know about how to set up your own podcast, down to the equipment and everything you need. Very, very good book. The Maverick Guide to Podcasting. And so I thumbed through that, read through that, and just started listening to even more podcasts. I already listened to about 20 different ones. And then I thought, okay, well, it's about time I just sort of get on with mine. But then the more I started to write the scripts for it and do the research and decide what it was going to be about, the more I thought, well, I can't just throw this out there. And here's the dilemma. There's a danger of, if you make something too perfect, it'll never happen. And I'm sort of on the edge of that. Because at some point I'm going to have to just launch it. And nothing's perfect. It never will be. But I am a bit of a workaholic perfectionist in terms of, I don't want to just half-ass it and throw it out there. It has to be of some level of quality because people have waited for this long. I don't want to disappoint them, So yeah, that's long story short, how I know Shannon LeGros.
Well, we can't wait for that podcast to come out. I know I'm excited. I think, I think that magical trio that you guys had back then definitely was very influential into what the show is now, and people still following yourself and Shannon and Ryan. Ryan's got a really good podcast. I know he makes our top 25, or I believe he's in the top 10 just about every month. So, and I believe he is up for top paranormal podcast this year. So he's in the running, he's in the voting for that, and I believe he's up against Shannon as well.
Oh, wow.
And some other very, very fantastic podcasts. But I think we're just about at our time limit tonight, Sam.
Wow.
Yeah.
That flew by, didn't it?
Yeah, time flies whenever you're having fun, huh?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're having fun.
Oh man, I'm having a great time. You're like over here, I'm working. You were working. We are watching you work, and you did a wonderful job here with our long tooth friend.
Just a doodle.
Just a doodle. So, Sam, absolute pleasure tonight. I enjoyed every minute of it. Getting to pick your brain and getting to see those dark crevasses where these demons get conjured up from inside of you, and then magically appear on the media. A pen meets paper.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time, Cody, to sit there and relay people's questions and ask questions for people. Yeah, it's been fun. Let's do this again.
Oh, absolutely. And to your fans, thank you for coming out. And do you want to go ahead and plug your site and your Patreon for all the listeners that might not be familiar, where to find you?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the main thing that you just have to sort of go to, where all the links are, is MrSamShearon.com. So Mr. the word, MISTER, and then Sam Shearon, SAMSHEARON.com. And the Patreon link's on there. My print store is on there. And for everybody watching, I have a little discount code for my print store. So you'll get 25% off if you're watching this. And it runs till Monday. And so if you just at the checkout use the word paranorm, PARANORM, then you'll get 25% off your entire order from my print store, just for you guys.
Well, I wrote it down because I want that Edgar Allan Poe print that you're talking so much about, and I'm willing to pay real money for that too. I'm not going to go get a thumbnail and then blow it up or anything like that. So.
Hey, don't give people ideas.
Yeah, but I believe you can actually join your Patreon for as low as $1 a month, or is it 99 cents?
Yeah, just the tip.
Yeah. So if you are kind of shy on spending money like something like this, and just want to kind of dip your toes in, there you go. Low price of $1 a month gets you Patreon access to Mr. Sam Shearon. So excellent. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you. Have a great evening, and keep drinking tea.
Will do. Thank you, everybody that's joined Paranormality Media on YouTube tonight. If you want to, I know we are going to re-air this episode, and I believe we will be transcribing this into a podcast version, and also will be in our next issue of Paranormality magazine. So thank you very much, everybody. Mr.